I still remember the way the room felt the moment I walked in. Too cold, too bright, and way too silent for an interview that was supposed to change my career. The receptionist had given me one of those polite smiles that never reach the eyes, and for a second, I wondered if maybe I already looked like someone who didn't belong there. But I pushed the thought aside and reminded myself why I came. I had worked hard, learned more than anyone ever gave me credit for, and I wasn't about to shrink just because the office looked expensive. The two interviewers sat across from me, one with a serious face like he'd been practicing his stare in the mirror all morning, and the other flipping through my resume like it was some old receipt. I told myself it was normal, that interviews were always a bit awkward in the beginning, but something about the way they scanned the paper made me feel like I was being weighed, measured, and silently judged before I had even said a word. We exchanged greetings, but even those felt stiff. The older interviewer finally asked me to talk about my experience. I explained everything clearly. My projects, my achievements, the challenges I handled, the results I brought in. I kept my voice steady, even humble, because I didn't want to sound like I was bragging. I was proud of my work, yes, but I had always believed my results spoke louder than my words. But the moment I finished, they looked at each other, then back at me, like my entire explanation was some story they didn't quite buy. And then it began, the questioning. Not normal questioning. Not curious questioning. But the kind that tries to poke holes in everything you've ever done. Are you sure you handled that alone? Did someone help you? Did you really lead that? Why does this number look too good? Are you sure these results are accurate? I stayed polite. Calm. I explained again with patience, because interviews are supposed to test you. They're supposed to check your confidence. But the more I talked, the more they pushed, like they wanted to find a crack somewhere. I could tell they had already made up their minds the moment I walked in. Maybe I was too young. Maybe I didn't look experienced enough for them. Maybe people like me weren't the ones they expected to excel. A few minutes later, the atmosphere changed again. The younger interviewer leaned back in his chair and said, almost casually, "These achievements sound exaggerated. Do you have proof you actually did any of this?" It hit me harder than I expected. Not because I couldn't prove anything. I could, but because they said it with such confidence, like my entire career was suddenly questionable just because they decided it was. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I stayed composed. My parents had always told me, don't let anyone see you lose control, especially when they want you to. So I smiled lightly and said I could show evidence if they needed it, but that only made them exchange another glance. This one almost amused. "I think we'll need a lot more than just evidence," the older one added with a smirk, as if he was waiting for me to break. In that moment, the interview didn't feel like a professional evaluation. It felt like a challenge, a personal one, like they wanted to remind me of some invisible limit they believed I wasn't supposed to cross. Still, I didn't back down. I explained things again, more clearly, not defensively, just firmly. But instead of listening, they kept cutting me off, as if they were searching for a reason, any reason, to dismiss everything I said. I kept wondering why they were treating me like this. Was it my background? My age? The way I looked? Or maybe they just couldn't believe someone like me had achieved more than they expected. But the real shift happened when the younger interviewer leaned forward and asked, in a tone so sharp it almost stung, "Be honest, did you embellish your experience to sound more impressive for this job?" For a second, the room felt too small, too quiet, too heavy. I sat up straighter. "No," I said calmly. "Everything I shared is real." But again, they didn't seem satisfied. They started whispering to each other, right in front of me, as if I wasn't even in the room anymore. I tried to stay focused, but their words felt like tiny needles poking at my patience. I wasn't angry, just disappointed. I had walked in with hope. They had met me with doubt, and I thought that was the worst part of the interview. But I was wrong, because just when one of them leaned forward, ready to hit me with yet another question that I could already tell would be insulting, the office door suddenly swung open. Not softly, not politely. It swung open like someone who owned the place and knew it. A tall man with a confident stride walked in, the kind of person whose presence makes people sit up a little straighter. He carried an air of authority without even trying. His jacket was still half on his shoulders, as if he rushed in without caring about formalities. And in his hand, He held a folder thicker than anything I had seen on that table. Both interviewers immediately froze. The older one actually stood up. "Sir, we weren't expecting you," he said quickly, voice suddenly respectful. The younger one's face drained of color, but the man wasn't even looking at them. His eyes were locked on me. Recognition flashed in his expression, followed by something else, something warm, real, genuine. He walked straight past them, straight toward me, like he didn't even notice their confusion. And then, with a tone that filled the entire room, he said, "You're here." The interviewers looked at each other, baffled. The man didn't wait for their reaction. He placed the thick folder on the table with a heavy thud and said loudly, "Why wasn't I informed that my top recommended candidate was in this interview today?" Both interviewers went pale. I blinked, unsure what was happening. He turned to them slowly, like a storm building, and asked, "Did you two seriously question their experience?" The room fell dead silent. And before anyone could respond, he added, this time with a tone that made the interviewers flinch, "Do you even know who you're talking to?" The interviewers' faces tightened. Their eyes darted from him to me, suddenly unsure, suddenly nervous. And then he opened the folder, and what he revealed inside, that changed everything. When he opened the folder, the interviewers leaned in slightly, their faces tight with worry. I could see confusion growing in their eyes, the kind that appears when someone realizes they might have made a mistake long before they even know what the mistake is. The papers inside the folder were neatly organized, clipped in sections, each page full of highlighted notes, printed emails, and what looked like project summaries. I didn't know what any of it meant yet, but I could sense the tension rising in the room like slow, steady heat. The man kept his hand on top of the folder for a moment, almost as if he wanted the silence to stretch a little longer. He looked at me with a familiar warmth that I couldn't place, the kind you feel when someone is proud of you even if you don't understand why. Then he finally spoke, not loud, but with enough weight in his voice that every word landed like a stone dropped in water. "These," he said, tapping the folder, "are the results of the projects I personally reviewed." The younger interviewer swallowed hard. "Sir, we didn't know." "You didn't ask," he replied flatly. His gaze didn't rise from the folder, but the disappointment in his tone was enough to make the air feel heavier. The two interviewers exchanged the kind of glance people share when they realize they've misjudged something important. But despite the shift in the room, despite the sudden respect that was creeping into their expressions, I still felt a strange mix of confusion and unease. I didn't know what was happening, or why this man seemed to know so much about my work. Before anyone could say anything else, he turned toward me again. "I should have been here from the start," he said softly, almost apologetically. I didn't know what to say. I could only nod slightly, still unsure whether I was supposed to speak, or wait, or ask something that might make this whole moment feel less unreal. But he didn't wait for me to respond. He flipped open the folder, revealing printed case studies, my case studies, written exactly the way I had submitted them months ago. My name was right at the top. The projects I had worked on, the results I had achieved, the improvements I had delivered, all there, all documented, all verified. The older interviewer cleared his throat nervously. "We were conducting a standard evaluation," he said, as if trying to sound calm. "We didn't mean to." To question their honesty, the man cut in sharply. The interviewer froze, his words dying before they could form. But I wasn't focused on their reaction. My attention stayed locked on the folder. Seeing my work laid out like that, page after page, made something tighten in my throat. 4 months, I had felt invisible, like everything I did was small, like none of it mattered to anyone in the higher floors of big companies like this. And yet here it was, cared for, printed neatly, studied, reviewed. Someone had seen it. Someone had valued it more than I ever realized. The man finally looked up at the interviewers and said, "This is the candidate I personally endorsed. Not because of assumptions, not because of reputation, but because of actual, proven experience." The younger interviewer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We weren't aware you had reviewed the application yourself." "And maybe," the man said calmly, "that's the real issue here." Silence followed again. A long one, the kind that reveals everything without anyone having to explain anything. I didn't enjoy watching the interviewers shrink back. I didn't even feel vindicated. Instead, I felt an odd mixture of sympathy and uncertainty. Something about all this felt too sudden, too intense. And I still didn't know who this man really was. He must have seen the confusion on my face because he turned to me again, his voice gentler this time. "You probably don't remember," he said, "but we met briefly at a conference 2 years ago. I saw your presentation. You talked about the system redesign you created at your previous job." A small memory flickered in my mind. The crowded hall, the nerves, the shaky microphone, the panel of people who looked bored until I started showing results. I remembered shaking hands with several guests afterward, but their faces were a blur. And honestly, back then, I never imagined anyone important would remember me. But he did. "You stood out," he continued. "Not because of confidence, not because you tried to impress anyone, but because your work was real, practical, thoughtful." His words settled in my chest like warmth spreading slowly. The interviewers were quiet now, listening more carefully than they had listened to anything I had said earlier. Their earlier confidence had disappeared completely, replaced by something a little like regret and a lot like fear of what might come next. But the man didn't scold them further. Instead, he let the quiet hang for a few seconds, then gently closed the folder. "I review their work because I've been looking for someone who understands impact," he said. "Someone who doesn't exaggerate, someone who doesn't hide behind fancy titles, someone who actually delivers results." The younger interviewer tried to smile awkwardly, but it faded almost instantly. I felt my palms getting warm. Not because of embarrassment, not because of fear, but because somewhere in the middle of all this, the ground beneath me had shifted. Something bigger was happening, something I didn't fully understand yet, but I knew it wasn't random. The man straightened up slightly, taking a slow breath. "Before we continue," he said, looking directly at me, "I need to ask you something important." His tone changed, not harsh, not accusing, but serious in a way that made my heartbeat slow down for a moment. "Your last project," he said, "the one involving the system redesign, something happened, didn't it?" My breath caught. I wasn't expecting that. Not here. Not now. Not in front of 2 interviewers who had already doubted everything about me. He didn't look away. "I saw the results," he added softly. "But I also saw what came after. The silence. The lack of recognition. The sudden shift in your company's reports." I froze. He knew. He actually knew. My fingers curled slightly on my lap. I thought I had left that part of my story behind, the part no one asked about, the part one never talked about, the part that still felt like a bruise I avoided pressing too hard. The 2 interviewers frowned, puzzled. They clearly had no idea what he was referring to. But he did. And for the first time since the interview began, he wasn't questioning my experience, he was questioning something else entirely. "I need you to tell me," he said, voice low, "what really happened after you delivered that final report." The room felt smaller again. My shoulders stiffened. My heartbeat thudded louder. Because the truth was, I hadn't told anyone the full story. I had carried it alone for months, trying to bury it under new work, new goals, new hopes. But the past has a strange way of showing up exactly when you least expect it. The interviewers looked at me now, waiting. The man looked at me, waiting. And inside me, something old and unsettled stirred again. I opened my mouth to speak. But before I could get a single word out, there was a sudden knock on the door. A firm, unexpected knock. Everyone turned their heads at the same time. The man's expression changed instantly, from calm curiosity to sharp alertness. The younger interviewer whispered, Who else is coming?" But no one answered. The knock came again, this time louder. And whoever was on the other side sounded like they weren't leaving without being let in. The knock echoed through the room again, sharper this time, almost impatient. All 4 of us turned our eyes toward the door. For a moment, no one moved. The tension that had already been building suddenly shifted into something heavier, something that made the air feel tight. The man who had walked in earlier straightened his posture, his expression sharpening in a way that made it clear he wasn't expecting anyone else to interrupt. The older interviewer finally cleared his throat and said, Should I get that?" But the man shook his head and began walking toward the door himself, slow and steady, like he was preparing for something. I watched him place his hand on the handle, pause for half a second, then pull it open. Standing on the other side was someone I never thought I'd see again. It was a woman, mid-40s, confident posture, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wore the kind of expression that always made people straighten their backs. I recognized her instantly, and my stomach sank. She wasn't from this company. She wasn't here for an interview. She wasn't a stranger. She was from my previous workplace, and she was one of the people who had been in the room the day everything changed. She looked right past the man and locked eyes with me. For a split second, the world seemed to still. I hadn't seen her since the morning I left that building for the last time. I hadn't spoken to her, hadn't heard from her, hadn't even dared to wonder what she thought of how everything ended. But she didn't look surprised to see me here. If anything, she looked prepared. The man stepped slightly aside, blocking most of the room, almost like he didn't want her to step in without permission. "Can we help you?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. She held up an ID badge from the company I once worked for. "I'm here to deliver some documents," she said calmly. Then she turned to me again. "But since you're here, we need to talk." Every part of me tensed. Memories I had tried to bury resurfaced. Late nights finishing a project no one wanted to acknowledge. Internal meetings where my ideas were accepted but my name wasn't. Reports getting lost. And then the silence that followed when the final result went live. The younger interviewer shifted in his seat, eyes widening. "You two know each other?" Neither of us answered immediately. The woman took a few steps into the room, her footsteps echoing. She didn't break eye contact with me, not even once. She looked serious, almost conflicted, and that worried me more than anger would have. The man beside her watched carefully. "This is an ongoing interview," he said. "Is there a reason you're here specifically for them?" She exhaled softly. "Yes. And no." Then she glanced at the folder on the table, the one full of my old work. Something changed in her expression, something unreadable. "I see you've already reviewed the reports." The older interviewer looked between them nervously. Is there something wrong with the reports?" She didn't answer him. Instead, she looked at me as if waiting for my reaction. But I wasn't sure what she expected. I wasn't even sure I was ready for this conversation. I had come here for a chance, a new beginning, not to reopen something I had fought so hard to leave behind. The man who knew my work stepped closer to her, blocking her path slightly. "If you're here to question their experience too," he said, "I can assure you." She interrupted him. "I'm not here to question anything." Then, softer but heavier, "I'm here because something wasn't handled correctly. And that unfinished matter involves both of us." My heart thudded. I didn't want to revisit the past. I didn't want to explain that final week, how the project was praised internally but presented to the higher-ups without my name. How the credit shifted away from me while I was still working. How suddenly I became invisible in the very place I had worked so hard for. How the last meeting felt like someone pulling a rug from beneath my feet. The two interviewers watched all of this unfold with wide eyes, probably wondering how an interview had turned into something else entirely, something layered, complicated, and definitely beyond their responsibility. The woman finally stepped forward and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This belongs to you," she said. I didn't move. The man who had supported me frowned. "What is that?" She hesitated. Something that should have been given to them months ago. The younger interviewer blinked. "What do you mean?" She ignored him. For a moment, no one spoke. The room felt too still, too full of things unspoken. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting, watching, expecting me to open the envelope or ask a question or take some step toward resolving the tension building like a storm overhead. But I wasn't ready. Because she wasn't just someone from my past. She was directly connected to the incident, the moment everything shifted at my old job. She was in the meeting where my work got presented. She was one of the people who watched the situation unfold. She was someone who said nothing when I needed someone to speak. The envelope might have contained the truth, or an apology, or something worse. Before I could react, she spoke again. "You deserve better," she said quietly. The words were so unexpected that even the man next to her paused. I felt my breath hitch for half a second, but she wasn't finished. "I can't change what happened," she added, "but I can at least make sure it doesn't follow you here." Her voice softened, but her eyes remained sharp, like she was carrying something heavy she hadn't said yet. The man stepped in again, his tone calm but firm. "You're saying there was an issue with the original project?" She nodded almost reluctantly. There were complications in the internal department, and certain individuals chose convenience over fairness. The older interviewer leaned forward. Complications. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The silence already explained more than her words. The man crossed his arms slowly. So you're telling me there was a reason their name disappeared from the final report? Her jaw tightened. Yes. My stomach dropped. Hearing someone else say it out loud made everything resurface stronger than before. The confusion, the numbness, the quiet frustration I carried alone. But the woman didn't stop there. And that's not the only thing, she said. The room froze again. Her eyes shifted slightly, not accusatory, not defensive, just tired, like she had been holding on to something she didn't want to keep. There's another issue, she said quietly. Something that affects all of you. The man's eyes narrowed. What kind of issue? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced at the door, as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. Then, slowly, she reached into her pocket, pulled out another small envelope, and placed it gently next to the first. The room went silent, completely silent. She looked at me again, her face tense with something like urgency. Before anything continues, she said, you need to know what's inside this one, too. My pulse quickened. The man stared at the envelopes, his expression serious. The interviewers exchanged nervous glances. I sat frozen, unsure whether opening them would bring clarity or chaos. The woman stepped back slightly. I didn't plan for this to happen today, she said. But since you're all here, it might be time. Time for what? Time to reveal what? My throat felt tight as she took a slow breath. There's something bigger going on, she said softly. And none of you have the full picture yet. The room felt too small for how much tension had suddenly filled it. No one spoke. No one even shifted in their seat. The two envelopes sat on the table like they were alive, like they were carrying something none of us were ready to face. I could feel every heartbeat in my chest, sharp and steady, almost too loud in the silence. The woman's eyes stayed fixed on me, but there was something in her expression, something like regret mixed with urgency, that made the air feel even heavier. The man who had defended me earlier stepped closer to the table, but he didn't reach for the envelopes. Instead, he looked at her with a steady, almost protective stare. Before anything is opened, he said quietly, you need to explain what we're dealing with. She inhaled slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. What happened at your previous company, she said, wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't poor communication, or oversight, or a paperwork error. It was controlled. My breath stilled. Controlled. The word dropped into the room like a weight. The interviewers exchanged alarmed glances. The older one straightened in his chair. The younger one swallowed hard, his pen slipping from his fingers and clattering on the table. The man frowned. Controlled by who? The woman looked down for a moment, almost like she was searching for courage, then quietly said, by someone higher than me. Someone who didn't want certain information getting out. Every muscle in my body tightened. I didn't know what she meant, but the tone of her voice told me it wasn't something small. It wasn't just about a missing name or a shifted credit line. It was something bigger, something deeper. The man pressed, are you saying their project was intentionally taken from them? She hesitated. Partially, but that was just the surface. The older interviewer stiffened. The surface? What does that mean? She opened her mouth to speak, but then her eyes flicked toward the door again, quick, nervous, like she sensed someone might appear at any second. The movement alone set everyone on edge. The man noticed. Is someone else coming? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she whispered, I shouldn't have come here alone. That one sentence sent a chill through me. The younger interviewer leaned forward carefully. Ma'am, if there's a security issue. It's not about security, she said, cutting him off with a sharp whisper. It's about information. The man glanced at me briefly, then back at her. What information? She lowered her voice even more. The project they completed revealed something that wasn't supposed to be revealed. And that's why things were changed. Why their name was removed. Why the report disappeared from the system for weeks before being re-uploaded. My breath hitched. I remembered that, The missing files, the strange delays, the sudden shift in tone from management. But back then, I thought it was just internal chaos. Office politics. Managerial confusion. I never imagined it was something deliberate. The woman stepped closer to the table, her hands trembling just slightly. And the reason I'm here today is because someone found out I didn't destroy all the original documents. The room went completely still. The man's expression darkened. You were told to destroy evidence. She didn't deny it. The interviewer's eyes widened. The younger one looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. But I didn't, she continued. And that first envelope, she pointed toward it, contains everything. All the reports, all the numbers, all the email threads, all the data you collected, exactly the way you submitted it. My mouth went dry. I didn't realize how tightly I was holding my hands until my fingers started to numb. The man nodded slowly. And the second envelope, her expression shifted into something sharper, fear mixed with urgency. The second envelope has the list. The man's tone turned low and controlled. List of what? She took a breath. A list of everyone who knew the truth, and everyone who tried to cover it up. Silence fell again. The tension in the room had climbed to a point where even breathing felt risky. The older interviewer spoke up, his voice shaky. Why bring all of this here? Why now? This is a job interview, not. Because they're still looking for the missing files, she said quickly. They realized the digital copies weren't erased. They found traces in the system. Someone from your old department accessed the records again 2 days ago. My eyes widened. 2 days ago. She nodded, watching my reaction. And when they did, they noticed something. Your name kept showing up again. It was hidden, but not completely. The system updates revealed pieces. Enough to raise suspicion. The man exhaled slowly, thinking deeply. So someone is trying to track down the evidence, and possibly anyone connected to it. The woman nodded. The younger interviewer shifted uncomfortably. This is bigger than anything we've handled before. No kidding, the older interviewer muttered. The man placed his hand on the table, steady and calm. You're telling me this candidate uncovered something in their project that someone wanted buried? Yes, she said. But they didn't know it. My pulse thudded painfully. What do you mean I didn't know? I asked softly. She turned to me, and for the first time since she walked in, her eyes softened, not with pity, but with a kind of protective seriousness. You found a pattern, she said. You reported it in your final analysis, but you didn't know what that pattern meant. You thought it was just a system glitch, an anomaly. My breath caught. She continued, it wasn't a glitch. It was a trail. And the moment you documented it, someone higher up realized the oversight. They realized you had unknowingly exposed something they were trying to hide. The man's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing at every new detail. He looked at the envelopes again, then at me, then at the woman. So the reason they discredited you, he said slowly, was to protect themselves. The woman nodded. And the reason you're here today, he continued carefully, is because whatever's in that second envelope isn't just about the past, it's about what might still be happening right now. She swallowed. Exactly. The weight of her words settled in my chest like lead. I could feel the interviewer's fear, the man's controlled intensity, and my own growing dread twisting together in the stillness. The man stepped back slightly, looking at me with steady eyes. Before we go any further, he said, I need to know something. The room became painfully quiet. His voice was calm, but there was a seriousness in it that made my heart race faster. When you discovered that anomaly, he asked softly, did you keep any copies for yourself, even unintentionally? Everyone's eyes turned to me. The woman's face tightened. The interviewers leaned in. My chest felt tight. Because the truth was, I did. And those copies, they weren't supposed to exist. And someone, somewhere, might already know I still have them. The moment hung in the air, heavy and uncertain, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Just when it seemed like the tension had reached its peak, a new shift began, subtle at first, but strong enough to unsettle everything. The message Alex received on his phone kept replaying in his mind. It wasn't just the warning itself that bothered him, but the fact that someone else clearly knew more about the situation than he did. The thought made his pulse rise, and he felt a mix of fear and curiosity pushing against his calm facade. He stepped away from the table, trying to make sense of a sudden twist. The soft hum of the office lights made the silence feel sharper, almost like the building was listening. Alex knew the conflict with David was already spiraling out of control, but now it felt like the ground beneath him had shifted again. Someone else was involved. Someone who wasn't supposed to be part of the story at all. The message had come from an unknown number, but the writing style felt familiar, too familiar. It reminded him of the way Maya used to leave short notes whenever she wanted to warn him about office politics or sudden changes in management. For a brief moment, he considered that it might be her, but that didn't make sense. She had left months ago, fed up with the same system Alex was still stuck in. Still, something about the timing didn't feel random. He turned around and saw Sam watching him carefully. Sam didn't ask any questions, but his eyes held a quiet concern, like he understood more than he was letting on. Alex hesitated before showing him the message, and when Sam read it, his reaction was immediate. His expression tightened, and a small sigh escaped. "This is not good," Sam muttered. "This means someone else knows what's happening behind the scenes." Alex felt a cold wave move through him. "But why warn me now? And who?" Sam didn't answer right away. He just paced slowly, thinking. The suspense between them grew thicker, making the room feel smaller. The more they tried to understand the message, the more questions formed in their minds. Every possibility pointed toward a deeper layer of the conflict, something hidden, something dangerous not in a physical way, but in a way that could destroy careers, trust, and the fragile balance they were trying to hold on to. As the minutes passed, Alex realized how this new twist raised the stakes completely. If someone was observing everything, then the conflict with David wasn't just a personal fight anymore. It was part of something bigger, something connected to the office politics that had messed up so many people before. The thought made his chest tighten, and for the first time, he wondered if he was already too deep to turn back. Suddenly, another notification buzzed on his phone. This time, it wasn't a message. It was an email. When he opened it, his breath stopped. An attached file, one that shouldn't exist, held a set of documents exposing conversations between higher management and someone anonymously discussing him. His name was mentioned multiple times, each line carrying tension, suspicion, and plans he wasn't supposed to know. Sam leaned over his shoulder and read silently. The shock on his face confirmed that this wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone was playing both sides, and Alex was caught in the middle without even knowing it. Before they could speak, the office door clicked. Both of them turned quickly. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow and intentional, like the person outside already knew what was happening inside. The lights flickered slightly, adding to the heavy feeling of suspense. Alex's heartbeat grew louder in his own ears. He didn't know whether to hide the screen or confront whoever was coming, but the uncertainty itself was enough to freeze him in place. Sam gestured for him to stay quiet as the footsteps grew closer. Whoever was approaching wasn't rushing. They were confident, almost too calm, as if they had all the time in the world. It made the moment even more unsettling. Alex exchanged a quick glance with Sam, both silently realizing that this was no longer just about workplace conflict. This was about strategy, secrets, and someone silently pulling strings behind the scenes. The doorknob turned slowly. The tension in the air thickened. Alex felt the weight of the situation pressing down harder than before. Every unanswered question, every hidden motive, every unresolved conflict, all of it was leading to this moment. And yet, nothing was clear enough to understand fully. Just as the door began to open, Alex's phone buzzed again with a third message. Only 3 words appeared this time, words that twisted the entire situation even further, escalating everything in an instant. "They know everything." Alex's breath caught. His mind raced. The stakes were no longer just high, they were dangerous. And for the first time, Alex understood that the real story had only just begun. The door opened slowly, and Alex felt the tension rush through his entire body. For a moment, he expected to see David standing there, ready to confront him, but instead it was Maya, the last person he thought would walk into that room. She stepped inside with a calmness that didn't match the storm swirling around Alex's thoughts. Her eyes moved from him to Sam, and then to the open email on the screen, as if she already knew exactly what they were looking at. Alex struggled to find his voice. "You Sent the messages? Maya nodded lightly. You needed the truth before it was too late. Sam crossed his arms, confused. But why come now? Why disappear for months only to show up in the middle of all this? She took a slow breath, like she was choosing her words carefully. Because the conflict with David wasn't just personal. He wasn't acting alone. You were being set up from the start, Alex. I tried to warn you before I left, but things were already moving too fast. Alex felt his heartbeat settling into something heavier, almost painful. All the stress, the fear, the confusion. Everything suddenly pointed to a bigger plan, one that he hadn't seen clearly until now. Maya walked closer and placed a small folder on the table. It looked worn, like she had been carrying it for months. Inside were documents, real ones this time, showing who had been orchestrating everything behind the scenes. It wasn't just David. It was someone higher, someone Alex had trusted. Mr. Collins, the same manager who had always spoken kindly to him, the one who pretended to guide him, the one who praised his work in front of the whole team. It felt like the floor had dropped beneath Alex. Sam muttered something under his breath, shocked beyond words. The emails, Maya explained softly, were arranged to make it look like you were leaking information. David's job was to push you emotionally until you slipped. And when you did, Collins planned to use it as proof. Alex stared at the folder, his throat tightening. But why me? What did I do? You outperformed him, Maya said. And he didn't like how quickly the directors noticed you. He wanted you gone before you replaced him without even trying. A mix of anger and disbelief washed over Alex. It was almost surreal, like hearing someone narrate a story about another person's life. But this was his life, his career, his reputation, and someone had tried to take all of it. Just then, another set of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, direct. This time, there was no hesitation. Mr. Collins stepped inside, holding a file of his own. His face was composed, but his eyes carried a sharp edge. It was clear he had heard enough to know his plan had cracked open. So this is how it ends, Collins said, closing the door behind him. You found your little team. Alex felt a strange calm come over him. For the first time, he wasn't the confused one. He wasn't the one running in circles. He finally understood the entire picture, and that clarity gave him strength. We know everything, Alex said quietly, meeting Collins' gaze without flinching. Collins smirked. Knowing isn't enough. No one will believe you. Maya stepped forward and placed a small recording device on the table. They will now. Collins' expression shifted, the first crack in his confidence. The device had captured every conversation he had been part of in the past hour. Every threat, every admission, every word he never planned for anyone else to hear. Sam took a step closer, his voice steady. It's over, Collins. For a moment, Collins looked like he might fight back, but then he let out a defeated laugh. A tired, bitter sound. You kids have no idea how this company works. Maybe, Alex replied softly, but I know how truth works. Collins left the room with his shoulders stiff, but not before throwing one last cold glare their way. As soon as he disappeared, Alex felt the weight slide off his chest. It was done. The conflict that had eaten at him for weeks was finally resolved. But before he could take a full breath, Maya tapped on her phone and showed Alex one final message. A message she had received just minutes earlier. It wasn't from Collins. It wasn't from David. It was from an unknown sender, and the words were simple. Good job. Now it's your turn. Alex felt the air in the room shift again, a new layer of uncertainty settling in. Sam leaned closer, trying to read over his shoulder. Maya's expression tightened, but she said nothing. The main conflict was resolved, yes. But this message hinted at something deeper, something waiting for Alex now that the dust had settled. An unexpected twist he never saw coming. And suddenly, he realized the story wasn't ending. It was opening a new door. Alex stared at the message on Maya's phone, feeling the last piece of tension tighten in his chest. For a moment, it felt like everything he had just gone through, Collins' plan, David's sabotage, the pressure of the interview, the client walking in, the unexpected twist, had only led him into something bigger. But as he kept looking at the words, he felt something shift inside him. This time, he wasn't scared. The panic that once controlled him wasn't there anymore. Instead, There was a quiet strength he hadn't noticed before. Sam leaned against the table, trying to make sense of it. "Do you think it's another trap?" Maya shook her head slowly. "No, if it was, the message would have been more direct. This feels like someone watching things from the outside. Someone who knew what was happening but didn't step in." Alex finally spoke. Someone who wanted the truth to come out. Maya nodded as if she'd been thinking the same thing. "Exactly." The mystery behind the message stayed in the air for a while, but the tension around it softened. Instead of feeling threatened, Alex felt curious. Whoever sent it hadn't tried to manipulate him. They seemed to acknowledge what he had overcome. Almost like they were reminding him that this was his chance to step forward into something new. In the days that followed, the company moved fast. HR launched an internal investigation. Collins was removed from his position, and David was put on suspension while the evidence was reviewed. People in the office whispered about what had happened, but surprisingly, none of it felt like gossip aimed at Alex. Instead, it felt like people were finally seeing him clearly, someone who had stood his ground when everything was against him. The client who had walked in during the interview even reached out again, this time with a formal request. They wanted Alex to join a project team directly as a consultant. The same company that had inspired fear during the meeting now seemed to trust him completely. It felt surreal, almost unbelievable, but Alex accepted. Not out of pride, but because he knew he had earned it through the chaos he survived. One evening, after finishing some final paperwork at the company, Alex found himself alone in the quiet meeting room where everything had unfolded. The place felt different now. The tension that once clung to the walls was gone. It was like stepping into a new chapter while still remembering the old one. Maya entered the room a minute later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want one." Alex smiled as he accepted it. "Thanks. For everything." She sat down beside him. "I didn't do as much as you think. You faced most of it on your own." "That's not true," Alex said. "You warned me when no one else even cared to look." She shrugged gently, but he could tell she appreciated the acknowledgement. Sometimes people stay silent because they're scared of getting dragged into something. But you push through everything they threw at you. That's rare. Alex let her words settle. He thought about everything. How the interview almost collapsed. How Collins tried to remove him. How the top client believed in him without even knowing the whole story. He thought about the recording, the emails, the confusion, the fear, the long nights wondering if he was the problem. And he realized something important. None of it had been wasted. Each moment had shaped him in ways he didn't appreciate at the time. Sam eventually joined them, dropping his bag on the chair. "So HR said they might promote you after the review. Not bad for someone they doubted in an interview." Alex laughed quietly. "Feels like a lifetime ago." "It kind of was," Sam said. "You're different now." Alex didn't deny it. He could feel the difference every time he spoke, moved, or made a decision. The weight he had carried for so long was gone, replaced by something stronger, clarity. They stayed in the room for a while, talking about what the future might look like. There were still unanswered questions, like who sent the mysterious message. But instead of letting it bother him, Alex saw it as a sign that the story was bigger than a single conflict. Sometimes people watched from a distance, waiting for the right moment to see who someone really was. When the final investigation results came out, everything became official. Collins had manipulated several situations for years, not just with Alex but with others too. The company offered him a settlement to avoid a public scene, but he resigned immediately. David tried to apologize, but Alex didn't hold any anger toward him anymore. He had been pulled into Collins' plan, pressured and misguided. That didn't excuse what he did, but Alex understood that growth sometimes comes from forgiving and moving on. The same week, Alex stepped into his new role with the client's project team. The work was challenging, but it felt refreshing. He wasn't proving himself to people who doubted him. He was contributing to something meaningful. His voice mattered. His ideas were heard. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like his experience wasn't questioned, it was valued. One afternoon, after a long meeting with the client, Alex checked his phone out of habit. A new message appeared. "No matter how far you go, stay grounded." The real strength wasn't in exposing them, it was in choosing who you became after. Again, no name, no number, just the message. But this time, Alex didn't search for answers. He smiled and locked his phone, trusting that whoever it was had nothing but good intentions. Maybe it was someone in the company who believed in him quietly. Maybe it was someone from the client side. Maybe someone had watched everything unfold and wanted to leave him with something to think about. Or maybe it didn't matter at all. What mattered was the truth in the message. He had changed. He had grown. He had learned to trust himself even when the world tried to shape his story for him. When Alex walked out of the building that evening, the sky was fading into soft colors. The air felt calm, simple, peaceful. Sam waved at him from across the parking lot, and Maya called out a reminder about their team dinner the following week. Everything felt grounded again, but in a new way. He realized the journey wasn't about the interview, or the conflict, or even the twist that nearly broke his confidence. It was about resilience, about staying human in the middle of pressure, about believing in his own worth even when others tried to take it away. And as he headed home, Alex carried a quiet confidence he had never felt before, a confidence earned through hardship, clarity, and truth. The story had finally come full circle, and it ended not with chaos or fear, but with a sense of calm, direction, and hope for what came next.